Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast, episode number 281. I'm Ramon Mejia, here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and author interviews. I have 5 new reviews for you folks this week, and that's going to include The Black Centurion, a LitRPG novel, a new Russian translation story from Alexander Romanov. We also have Eternal Dominion Book 2, Traction. I'll also be reviewing Tower Clamor Terry, a LitRPG series. Also, Brambles and Thorns, the 4th book in the Infinite World series, and the webcomic Heavenly Demon Cultivation Simulation. So I got 5 reviews for you folks. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about some LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, actually, we don't have any LitRPG news, but it did how we intro the section, I guess. So a nice quiet week in that particular section, but we have some stuff that has come out recently, so I'll just read those off to you. All the stuff that's come out since the last episode of the podcast. That's going to include Adventures on Brad book number 9, also The Houndsman book number 2, a delightful little novella from Jonathan Brooks called Valentine Core, a holiday dungeon core novella. I think he's trying to monopolize the dungeon core holiday sub genre. So good for him. We also have a new book from Justin Miller, World Keeper. Information is Power. I actually think there's another one called Keeper World, which is like a sort of a parallel side series. This is the 9th book in the series. I actually was surprised to see it. I hadn't heard about it on any media channels or from the author. So if you're a fan of the series, you got some new stuff from the author to read. We also have Dungeon Hearts, Hellgate. Is out. That is actually going to be the 3rd book in that particular series. I know it doesn't say on the cover art or anywhere, but if you like the series, 3rd book is out for you. We also have the 4th book in the Touch of Power series by Jay Boyce called Insight. Lots of fans have been enjoying this one recently, so go check it out if you haven't read the series. We also have We Hunt Monsters. Also out is The World of Waldira. This is a kind of a side series. It's set in the same universe as the other one, but it's called Heroes of the Final Frontier. This is, again, another Russian translation novel from the same author. We also have Dungeon Core 101 Midterms is out. The Drone Rising book number 2 is also out. A new book from D.B. King called The Tempest, a LitRPG Adventure, Elemental Mastery book number 1. Also out is The Legend of Rendley Ghost Hound book number 2. Also out is Lady February, Year of the Sword, book number 2 by the amazing Dakota Kraut. We also have Climbing the Dragon's Tower, book number 3, Dragon Riders of Lon. We also have another book from Deck Davis called Dungeon Core for Hire. The 2nd book in the Sparta Online series called Chaos is out. We also have the 3rd book in the Immersion Online series, Immersion Online Symbiont. Also out is Discovering Power, Realms of Power of Fury, book number 1 by Kevin McLaughlin and Michael Anderley. We also have Defiance of the Fall, book number 4 is out for you to enjoy, as is the 2nd book in the Captain Overdrive 2 series. This is one of the rare mech LitRPG stories, so I'm always happy to see something new and different. Also out is Advanced Heroes of Last Resort, as is the 5th book in the Ponker Cosmos series called Nine Hells. Also out is a superhero dungeon core kind of mix from John Stowalt called Villain Core Superhero Dungeon book number 1 rather. Also the 10th book in the Discardium series, Clear Threat. So that's out for you to enjoy, as is the 4th book in the Alpha Physics series. And that's it. That's all the stuff I could find and all the week since the last episode of the podcast. There are some new audiobooks for you to enjoy as well. I know audiobook listeners always love to hear this list because, I'll be honest, they're kind of hard to find on Amazon. LitRPG books. So, Defiance of the Fall, book number 4, out as an audiobook as well as an ebook. Solo Leveling, volume number 3. This is a series I really enjoyed, although I will admit I've enjoyed the webcomic. As a webcomic, Solo Leveling is finished, so you can always check that out there, but the ebook and the audiobooks are here for you to enjoy. Also out as an audiobook is The Chosen Ones, Master Hunter K, book number 2 is out, as is The Crypt Lord's Call, God Guild, book number 1 rather. Also out is The Castle Manager, The Fantasy World of Door, book number 3. Valentine Core is out as an ebook, as an audiobook at the same time. Also out is Mephisto's Magic online. This is a compilation of the first 3 books in this series, so you can get them as one super large audiobook. Also out as an audiobook is Ether Flows book number 2, Ida, Gaia, and Origins of Ragnarok. Also out as an audiobook is Royal Blood of a Bloodhaven LitRPG. Lady February, the one we talked about from Dakota Route. Year of the Sword book number 2 is also out, as is Overtaken Online book number 4. And Randomly, The Legend of Randomly Ghost Town book number 2, also as an audiobook. Also out is Salvos book number 3, The Plaguelands, as is The Skeletal Champion Pandemonium Dungeon Apocalypse. And for folks who love Cultivation, we have Dragon's End, a 4X LitRPG series, Warlords of the Circle Sea book number 5. We also have Cyber Squad Level 2 is out, as is Beastborn, book number 3, Mist Wardens. And for the folks who love the Good Guy series and stuff by Eric Uglin, Wild Wild West, book number 12 in that series is out. The 3rd book in the System of the Apocalypse series, Apocalypse Dungeon System, is out for you. As is the 12th book in the Dragonheart series, Paths of the Glory. Also out is Intersystem Natural Laws Apocalypse series, book number 1. And Legends Online, book number 8. And another kind of holiday-themed Dungeon Core novella from Jonathan Brooks is A Christmas Core, a holiday Dungeon Core novella. Folks who love the Cavern the Creature series, book number 9, out as an audiobook. So the Critical Fighters, book number 9 is out for you to enjoy. Also out is Godsworn, Goblin Summoner, book number 3. And last but not least, City of Mass, book number 1, Fall of a Dungeon House. So all kinds of great audiobooks and ebooks for you to enjoy. On to the stuff that's coming out in the near future. This is a wonderful list where folks who have to plan their reading schedules because they have limited funds or just limited space and time. This is a great list for you folks. So you can see what's coming out so you can plan accordingly. Also, if you're an author, great place to see like, oh, where is a nice spot where it's not too crowded to publish your book. So great stuff. On February 28th, we have Crafter's Fate, a LitRPG adventure from D.B. King. On February 28th, we'll have a Dungeon Phoenix, the Dungeon Slayer series, book number 4. On February 28th as well, it'll be the 5th book in the Dungeon Crawler Crawl series, The Butcher's Masquerade. On March the 1st, Dreadlord Wizard, Badges of Doricum, book number 1. March 1st, it'll be the last book in the System Apocalypse series called System Finale. On March the 1st as well, it'll be Outranked, The Weight of It All, book number 5. On March the 1st, it'll be Eternal Dominion, book number 4, Assertions. On March the 1st, it'll be Paragon of Blood, which is actually, according to Luke Chamalenko, who'd been promoting it, it is a LitRPG story, although it doesn't say it in the title or in the novel description. He says it is. So there you go, March the 1st, Paragon of Blood. On March the 1st as well, it'll be Rise of Mankind, book number 3, Age of Iron. On March the 2nd, it'll be Prime Numbers, Sigmar World, book number 6, LitRPG series. On March the 2nd, it'll be Portals of Albion. On March the 2nd, it'll be Corruption and Sentinels, a Monster Evolution, Salvos Volume 5, Part 1. Long title, apparently a long book if it needs a Part 1. On March the 2nd as well, it'll be Full Murder Hobo, book number 2, Anything. And on March the 7th, it'll be Still Left Out by the System, Lonely Apocalypse, book number 2. March the 8th, it'll be The Primal Hunter, a LitRPG adventure. March the 9th, it'll be Dr. Druid, book number 2. March the 11th, it'll be An Impossible Task and Vile Solution, Bone Knight, book number 7. March the 14th, it'll be The Buccaneers Due, book number 3. March the 15th, The Seismal Accords, number 2. The title is Modulate. On March the 15th, it'll be Apocalypse Cultivation, book number 1, Trojan Nightmare. On March the 15th, New Realm Online, book number 2, Broken Bones. On March the 15th, a new book in the Illusionist series, which is a side series set in the Viridian Gate Online universe called Sharper's Coin. On March the 16th, it'll be Towers of Acalia, the Reincarnation Core, volume number 6. On March the 16th, Viceroy's Prime, book number 3, Fractured Earth. On March 21st, Apocalypse Knights, book number 2. On March 22nd, the TN Trilogy, first book in the series called Lost Soul. On March 23rd, Year of the Sword, book number 3, Dokeshi March. March 24th, Blessed Time, book number 3. This book actually was supposed to have come out at the end of February. It was pushed back until the end of March, though. On March 24th, The Good Guys book number 3, Flex in the City. March 28th, Vancouver the Dragon, The Last Adventure. This is the 4th book in the series and the end of the series apparently. March 29th, The Unwitting Prince, New Home book number 1. March 30th, Unfrozen book number 4. This is one of the Russian translation stories called Killer Play. On March 30th, I'm actually looking forward to this one immensely. Red Mage book number 3, Fracture, which is the Apocalypse series written by Xander Boyce. So has been a very excellent series up to this point. So we'll see how it goes in book number 3. On April the 5th, it'll be Morkster Chef book number 2. On April the 5th, it'll be He Who Fights with Monsters book number 5. On April the 11th, it'll be Project Stellar book number 6, The Legate. On April the 12th, it'll be Kairos, a Greek myth and pirate LitRPG. On April the 14th, it'll be Range book number 4, The Raid on Inferno. April the 15th, it'll be a new series from Angelus Maximus, King Minos, Masters of Minos, a city building LitRPG series. On April the 18th, it'll be Alpha Rome book number 4. On April the 18th, Elemental Mastery book number 2. On April the 20th, it'll be The World of Waldira, Heroes of the Final Frontier book number 2, the first book in the series just being out now. On April the 26th, Cultivator vs. System book number 1, The First Steps. On April 26th, the third book in Jeff the Game Master series called Mastering Magic. On April the 26th, it'll be the second book in the Epic Blade series called Electria. On April the 30th, it'll be Mana Harvest book number 2. May the 1st, rather, it'll be Sentence Troll book number 5. May the 3rd, Wizard's Tower LitRPG series. May the 10th, it'll be a new series called Trickster's Tale. Is that a loot in your pocket? So I'm guessing a humorous LitRPG story. On May the 10th, it'll be the second book in the Crow Cycle, book number 2. On May the 11th, it'll be Interworld Network book number 4, Running the Edge. May the 12th, it'll be the 8th book in the in the Underdog series, Renegade. On May the 19th, it'll be the 9th book in the Bad Guy series called Dark Town Funk. May the 20th, it'll be the third book in the Cowboy Necromancer series. On May 31st, Domestication, a Battle Mage Farmer book number 1. On May 31st, Alpha Physics book number 5. On May 31st, Defiance of the Fall book number 5. And that's all I know about in the near future. I mean, there are books online that are pre-ordered all the way up until 2 years from now, if I think is the longest one I've seen. But that's way too far, and those dates change sometimes. So I generally want to go about a couple months. So that's where the end of February, I figured March, April, May is a good bit of pre-orders to have available for you to look at and to see and to plan your schedules. So that's it for all that stuff. On to new releases and reviews. Okay, first up for the week is going to be Black Centurion, a LitRPG novel written by Alexander Romanoff. It is 445 pages, $3.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. A new novel from the best-selling Russian LitRPG author of Small Unit Tactics. Sometimes life can be cruel and unpredictable, snatching away all you hold dear in an instant. When you're betrayed by the one person you love most, the actions you commit in the heat of the moment may derail the rest of your life. You can't undo what's been done, and now an incorruptible AI keeps thwarting your attempts to find the truth. Will you be able to persuade it? This is the opportunity given by an RPG game that works like an international arbitration court, an impartial and error-free machine. For a top-ranked player who has already played millions in the game, this task sounds like child's play, but things aren't as simple as they seem, and this game is totally unlike any other. Our hero will have to save a life, survive, and most importantly, prove to an AI that he's a good guy and deserves to have the one thing he wants more than anything else on Earth. Okay, well, there you go. Full disclosure, I received advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. This is a Russian translation story. If you read Small Unit Tactics, you're familiar with the author's kind of style. Overall, this is kind of an okay trip into a Roman RPG world. The world set up with the main character means to change his personality and get a chance to get visitation rights to his kids is written well, but it doesn't feel connected to the in-game story until about 33%, when the main character ends up adopting 9 NPC kids. And I'll be honest, when I read the beginning of the story is set in the real world. It's the main character trying to argue with his brother about trying to get custody for his kids, and actually being a pro gamer and like making a bunch of money in this game situation and wanting to use that money to make a legal attempt to like get visitation rights. And then he meets with his brother, and he's like it's kind of revealed in the conversation and the incident that occurred where he kind of lost his family, lost his wife and his kids, and lost their there's a whole like background situation on the character. And I'll be honest, I liked the writing. I thought it was like a really well told little piece of background information and story development for him. And then it kind of doesn't do anything else with the rest of the story. It really is just like this nice little short story nugget that doesn't really feel connected to the rest of the story, because the rest of the story is set in this VR game world. And the premise is that he's the main character. There's a setup in the future where like judge decisions are made by virtual reality or virtual intelligences. And the main character is supposed to be proving to this virtual intelligence that he's a capable father, that he won't be repeating the incident that caused him to lose his kind of family in the first place. And his brother suggests that he go and play this video game, this MMO, where that same virtual intelligence is kind of overviewing it to prove that he has changed as a person. So it's like a really kind of convoluted intro into the story universe. And again, I said that it doesn't really feel like it's connected to most of the story, because even though it's mentioned here and there occasionally about like his purpose in playing this game, it doesn't really show up. It doesn't really like have like a real impact into, until like a few particular points. And it doesn't, and then once he's in the game world, the main character really is just doing this slice of life exploration thing of this world, this MMO, where he's supposed to be using his experience as a professional gamer to kind of like figure out the rules of the system and how it's so amazing, lifelike, and how he's supposed to incorporate the kind of backstory development of his character into like becoming powerful and leveling and doing quests and stuff. And it's not really until like 33% when you actually reminded like, oh, that's right, he has this purpose where he's supposed to be proving he's a good father when he kind of adopts 9 kids, and then that disappears for another good portion of the story. So that setup really doesn't, to me at least, even though it's well written, I'm like, and I enjoyed it, it didn't really mesh well with the majority of the story. Once again, in the game, the main character, the story is really kind of slice of life. The main character, again, appreciates how realistic NPCs are, works to help the groups he meets, has regular quests, fights. And I think the thing that people are going to either really like about the story or not is kind of the Roman theme. If you like the Roman life and world building and like the description of weapons and culture and stuff, I think you might enjoy this based on that. That's kind of the point where I liked, where I had to like, how much am I enjoying this based upon like the MMO stuff and the game stuff versus just like this kind of fantasy-esque Roman universe. And I kind of like the fantasy-esque Roman universe a little bit more because the game stuff itself is just kind of okay. There's regular notifications, there's quests, character sheets, all that normal stuff. The only thing that the author probably brought into the story that was kind of different and a little original is how the main characters, his character in the game world, his backstory is revealed and developed, and it's kind of this gradual piece and bits thing where he starts out with a limited bit of information about who his character is, and then as he interacts with the game world, it either creates more backstory based upon his actions, or it's revealed as he talks to people who are connected with this character's former life. And I don't want to get too spoilery with it, but it's kind of like, oh, that's a nice way to reveal backstory, I suppose. And it just kind of lends itself to like gradual world building and character development. And I'm always like a fan of like history stuff, even though I'm not a particular fan of like a Roman world. I liked how that was kind of, piecemealed, kind of sprinkled along throughout the entire story instead of like this big gigantic info dump. And how like the not the character himself, like his tune, his character, his player character, his backstory mattered to how he was interacting with the world. So I'm like, oh, that's a nice little touch there. Overall, again, it's a good story once the main character gets out into the world and starts to kind of kind of get this view of like what the larger Roman world is like. Other than that, it's a nice little regular action adventure, keeps the story moving. Again, it tries to interject some heart with a setup about him wanting to regain visitation rights to see his kids, but that really doesn't translate well into the story like as a motivating force, at least to me, for his actions, because he just kind of it pops up occasionally like, oh yeah, by the way, remember that thing, here's a little nod to it. But for most of the story, it's really just more like a regular like exploration adventure into this Roman kind of fantasy RPG world, which is perfectly fine if that's what you enjoy. I like the little details and Roman customs, weapons, culture stuff. But that's kind of the enjoyment I had on it. For me, I give it a score of 7.3 out of 10. Had a good time with it. Not the best story in the universe, not the worst, just okay, kind of an okay story. That's Black Centurion, a LitRPG adventure with a score of 7.3 out of 10. Okay, next up is going to be Eternal Dominion Book Number 2, Traction, written by Burton Dean. It is, here's the author's description. Zeal and his friends continue their journey to the top of Eternal Dominion. However, as Zeal searches out potential leaders for his guild and bolsters its ranks, others are moving as well. Will he and his guild weather the storm, or will they lose their footing and be stopped before they can even really begin? Yes, I begin to introduce romantic complications in this book. Yes, Alex Zeal's relations will become more complex and integral to the plot as the series goes on. I'm sorry, this is the author's update of the description of the story. He's saying, yeah, there's romance here. There's no smut scenes. I will skip details. So there you go. That's it's got a qualifier. I didn't realize that was part of the novel description. Okay, for me, it's a good story. I enjoyed it less than book number 1. This second book in the series continues the Regressor storyline with the main character using his knowledge of the MMO that is sweeping the world to his guild's advantage. This time, the beginning of the conflict is a raid by the opposing dungeon, and how the main character uses not only knowledge of the game circuits and his decades of experience as a guild leader, but also a knowledge of the habits, personalities, and weaknesses of the opposing guild leader. To a degree, things kind of go a little too well for the main character, as there don't seem to be any real challenges for him in the entire story. Like essentially he does some training, he does some development of like his guild and stuff in the story. But there's nothing really opposing him this time. There aren't really anybody really standing, like, and people attempt to. I mean, the guild does. They like opposing faction guilds. But the main character doesn't really seem to have any problem like dealing with them at all, and that's kind of, and for some people that's a real draw. Some people like a overpowered main character story, and this is kind of that to a degree. The main character is using his foreknowledge of things that exist in this newly built MMO universe, because he's a regressor. He's come back. He's reliving his life that he's lived in this world, and so he has all these knowledge advantages that he's using while in the story. But for me, I liked a little. I would have liked a little more opposition, a few challenges for him. Instead of him kind of not coasting through necessarily, but a pretty smooth path at this point. On the game mechanics side of things are the same as they were last time. Still leveling. It's summarized a little bit more as the focus shifts to raising guild members and not necessarily the main character's individual progression anymore. There are a few wand-wavy tricks in the story where the main character kind of pulls these tricks out of his hat at the last minute without properly developing to some degree. But there aren't a lot. There's just a couple moments where it's like, oh yeah, by the way, we're winning because of this thing that I didn't necessarily tell you about. And then there's an explanation of the background, like, oh, this is when he did it and set it up. I was like, oh, okay, that's a little one-wavy, but it doesn't ruin things for me. The only small complaint I have about the story, and I think other reviewers have had this same kind of complaint, and it's addressed in the novel description, which I thought it was funny, is that in the middle of the story, it kind of takes this jarring turn into harem territory. And as the author says in his novel description, there's no graphic sex scenes. There is talk of sex, and the things that they kind of want to do, but there's no actual description of them doing those things. It's definitely faded black. But the main character definitely takes on 2 girlfriends. And while personally I don't have a problem with romantic development, I thought it was a little sudden. Like, it really does go in the story from one day to the next, where the main character is single and he's just maybe flirting a little bit, to him going out on dates and having sexual relationships with these two women. And it just felt like it was this instantaneous progression without any real setup. Especially considering that the main character is a regressor. So in his mind is like someone who's retired, who's like 40, 50, 60, and so when he's regressing back to his body, he's dating teenagers, or, at most, like early 20ish. And there really is no development for him having this polyamorous kind of relationship. Even in his background, that he's like, I've never done this. I've never really had these relationships. But he's like, but suddenly he's just so suave and attractive that a women are throwing themselves at him. And it just felt like this huge ramp up of like, oh, that's I guess very sudden. And it almost felt to me like it existed to kind of check a box to some degree. And in the middle of the story, and it doesn't really have much of an impact on this particular story, I should say. But it just kind of this weird little side adventure that really was kind of distracting for me, and I didn't enjoy it at all, to be honest. But thankfully, the entire scene there doesn't take up more than 10% of the story, and so I would just say, if you don't like that stuff, skip it. The story picks right back in the action, adventure, and guild versus guild stuff as soon as that's done. So that while the section did draw down my enjoyment, it didn't ruin things for me. It's just like a section that very skippable for me in the future. If I continue in this series, I'd probably skip all that entirely, because it's just not my thing. Overall, good story, although I didn't enjoy the book less than the book number 1. Score 7.4 out of 10 for me. That's Eternal Dominion book number 2, Traction, with a score of 7.4 out of 10. And next up is Tower Climber Terry, a literary series written by Deck Davis. It is 269 pages, $2.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. A LitRPG tower climber adventure. In the heart of the world, there's a tower that shouldn't exist. One that has torn the fabric of reality and brought forth hordes of monsters thirsty for blood. A tower filled with loot. But one that's spreading its corrupted roots across the land and showing no signs of stopping. Enter Terry Brine. He spends his days working in a bar, and the rest of the time he's looking out for his little brother. He's also scored highly on the aptitude test for a stat rune, which would let him level up and earn abilities and choose a class. But it comes at the price he's never been willing to pay. One day, though, he does something that leaves him no choice. On the run from the law, there's only one job open to Terry now, and that job is called a tower climber. So there we go. It also says Tower Climber Terry will read about leveling up and rare abilities and experience-based power progression. Okay. I wanted to like this story. I've liked other things that Deck Davis has written, but a lot of his stories are kind of hit and miss. And he writes fast enough, I think, that he's able to kind of explore these concepts and experiment with different kind of combinations of storytelling and also RPG mechanics and try things out. He has a huge variety of series, and a lot of them will be like one book, maybe 2 books, and then he'll stop writing it if it's not popular enough. And I think that's what this kind of is. And some people will really enjoy it, other people won't. I ended up not really enjoying it as much. It didn't really work for me. And most of that, it comes down to a few different things, which we'll talk about in a second. But the story is really what it says on the cover. Tower Climber Terry. I feel like it's sort of supposed to be playing like Dungeon Crawler Carl, except the main character's climbing a tower instead of crawling in a dungeon. And that's kind of all it is. It's a slice of life story with the main character, where there's some kind of contrived setup that gets the main character and his brother into a tower, which is kind of a reverse engine. And he goes exploring, he fights monsters, he kills things, he progresses in his particular power system. And he, explores and grows and gets new powers and becomes better at his job and his class. And that's kind of all it is, though. And that's not necessarily bad if the fights are entertaining and there's things that are interesting about the main character and plot development and world building. And the story kind of has little bits of all those things, but they don't, for me at least, mesh well together. For the most part, the story felt very directionless. And it's set into a fantasy RPG world, so nobody's like transported to this world from our world. It really is just a fantasy world where a tower suddenly appears and people can go and go there and grow in powers, and the country has kind of developed around it in creating these ways for them to level. And it's really just like this fantasy justification for including game mechanics, but it definitely feels a little contrived. But again, it's okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it didn't really kind of mesh well together in this particular instance. And for the most part, the main character and his brother go adventuring, multi-leveled monster tower. And again, the fights, they're fine. I think the fights are probably the best part of the story in that they're regular, and they're different kind of fights, so it doesn't get repetitive at least. The world building is okay. I probably would have enjoyed world building a little bit more if I would have seen the outside world first and then kind of the tower, see what the difference is, but that doesn't really exist. There is some background information in the story about like, how the world governments are dealing with this particular tower, and allowing people to just kind of go there for free because they get resources from that, which really kind of bugged me at the end because that just suddenly changes on a dime for no reason, but whatever. But again, these things, other issues made it not work for me. The dialogue in the main character in the story was a little too gamer for me. And for the most part, I don't really have an issue with that. And what I mean by gamer is that there's a bunch of like RPG game terms like leveling, builds. The main characters are really concerned about how their builds are going and how they develop as a party to fight these monsters, and they're using all the stat information. For the most part, I would have a problem with that in another story. But in this one, it's a fantasy world story where these RPG things have kind of existed as a place for elite classes, for elite people who work for the government as soldiers, whatnot. And so there's supposed to be like a limited amount of information. And in the setup of the story, it's very clearly stated the main characters aren't well educated. They've lived in this town their entire life, basically. This small town. The main character works as a bartender. And that's all the information we get. So there really is no setup or world building done to justify like this very much modern world gaming lingo that feels like it's interjected into the story. So there's just like this conflict between dialogue types that felt more like they belonged into either a transported to a game world story where like somebody from our world who's a gamer goes to a fantasy world, or just like a modern setting world where like, these things exist in a modern world where gaming exists and gaming culture exists. I didn't feel like that gaming culture fit in with this generally fantasy world. And so it felt very inconsistent in the world building to some degree. Second, again, the story feels directionless. There is a setup for the story where that just pushes the main characters into this tower thing, but that's all it really is. Like why they're going there in particular instead of fleeing to a different country or to a different place where they can outrun the law, if that's what their purpose is, never really felt like it made sense. I get that it's just the premise of getting them into this tower, but then once they get in the tower, it's like, okay, you're here now. What's the purpose for your life? Are you just setting yourself up to exist as subsistence farmers or monster killers to make a living? And to be honest, it was never really. They never really had a purpose at that point. Like, it's just like, oh, they're here and they're going to explore cuz. About halfway into the story, you kind of get a purpose, and that they take on this quest to help find somebody in this never-ending and unending tower. But that really just an excuse for them to continue to explore. And it really felt that way. Third, the end was super frustrating for me, at least. The big quest that they had received resolves itself without the characters ever like real intervention. Like it would have resolved itself eventually if they didn't exist. Essentially, I always felt that always feels very frustrating. In that all the things they do, all the adventures they go on, all the efforts they make to track down this character they're supposed to find, it felt useless because at the very end of the story, it's just like, oh, they're like walking through town. There's like, oh, that guy, yeah, he's over there. And it's like, oh, okay. And it does resolve. So I guess that's something, but it felt very incidental. Like, oh yeah, we're just going to continue doing things. And well, yeah, he was just there the whole time hanging out. So I was like, okay, that's that's a way to resolve a thing. So yay, there's resolution, which is better than some stories I've read. So that's good in its own point. But then in addition to that, the bad guy that was kind of described at the very beginning of the story, this is kind of spoilery, so just if you don't want to listen to it, that's fine. But he kind of makes a reappearance towards the end, and there is no resolution with that big kind of conflict that was supposed to have been like the premise and the inciting incident in the story. And I thought that's just like, oh, you brought him back, you made it seem terrible. You bring him back, and then it's like, okay, we'll deal with this in the next episode of this series. And I'm like, okay, that's a choice. And I understand that's exactly what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be like the lead into the next book to get you to read the next thing. But for me, it's just like, that's an annoying thing. I would rather have not seen him if he's not going to be some like actual, resolution of any kind with dealing with that situation. But again, I understand how it exists and why it exists. Just was frustrating to me as something that was left intentionally dangling. On the game mechanic side of things, pretty decent. It's fine. The author knows what LitRPG is. He knows kind of the basic characteristics that our readers expect. There is an RPG interface, and there are lots of notifications, ability stats increase individually when you're using them, which is more of a not experience points get initial amounts, but if you're hitting things a lot, your strength is going to go up. If you're getting hit a lot, your constitution is going to go up. If you're being intelligent, your intelligence is going to go up. So it's experience driven in that respect. Like if you're using the stat, it's going to go up. And then how you're using the stat, when it levels, also determines what special abilities are available to you when you do level it. So you get special abilities when you get your strength to the next level. But if you've only been, hitting trees, you're going to get something related to that essentially. But if you've been fighting the entire time using your fist versus a sword, you're going to get fist related options for choosing. So I did like the fact that it was a very flexible system, even though everybody has the same access to it. So I thought that was interesting. But I really wasn't really super invested in the RPG progression because I never understood the motivation for why the characters wanted to improve, why they wanted to fight, why they wanted to adventure, why they wanted to, take on their specific roles as like tank versus damage dealer, which you get gamer terms in a fantasy world that, never had these games. Felt a little awkward. And so even though the RPG system itself is fairly robust and flexible, it essentially took class systems that already exist and were familiar and just kind of tweaked them a little bit in how their progression happens. So it's nothing too innovative, but still not bad. Overall, not a badly written story in any way, shape, or form. The story, for me, just wasn't engaging. The first half is very forgettable. And that even though there were like these, it's just a series of like just little adventures. It's a slice story again. But again, nothing felt it because the characters essentially were just wandering around randomly. It's like, oh, okay, what's the point of this? And for that was a little too much for me. And the end was just kind of frustrating. Not frustrating to like throw the book or anything. It's just like, kind of a meh ending to some degree. And the one kind of plot quest they have is just kind of resolved on its own without really the main character's interventions in the first place. Just getting there was kind of the most that they did. So for me, it just didn't work out. But if you enjoyed it, hey, go review the book, go let the author and other readers know how much you liked it. But for me, it just didn't work, unfortunately. So again, not a bad book necessarily, just didn't work for me for the reasons that I stated. That for me, it's going to get a score of 6 out of 10. That's Tower Climber Terry with a score of 6 out of 10. Okay. Next up is going to be Brambles and Thorns, The Infinite World, book number 4, written by J.T. Wright. It is 820 pages. It is $3.99. It's available on Kindle Limited, and here's the author's description. Life was simpler when someone was around to tell him what to do. With a band of adventurers looking to him for direction, whether he likes it or not, Trent Embra needs to figure out how to lead them. But how was he supposed to lead when there were so many things Trent hadn't figured out for himself? An unidentifiable seed in his storage, and whispers in his head, Trent points his team west towards the wilds. It was a good direction as any. Maybe in uncivilized lands, Trent would learn what it meant to be an adventurer and sort through what mattered most. Okay, simple novel description, simple review to be honest. This is a good story that follows Trent as he leads his group through unfamiliar locations and trials. That's kind of it. There's a new personal training ground that he has access to that I thought added a little spice, as it allowed the main character to practice his skills, and it was a nice way to travel up the travel stuff. But this is a slice of life story. It's entertaining. It's good. It doesn't develop some of the plot lines, I think, that were in the first 3 books very much. There are little updates. But for the most part, it really is just kind of slice of life adventure where the main character is going to different places, going through some adventures, exploring how he is developing as a person, not just as an individual, but also as the leader of this group, and how he's growing in that respect, in addition to like training his skills. And I really like the training sections quite a bit. It was a nice little way to shift the pacing of the story a little bit, so not just travel stuff where and in travel parts of the section nicely done. Again, get to nice description of the world, nice description of these new places, these different cultures, their interactions with these characters, and the growth of these characters as they talk it, while they're camping and everything. All that stuff's really nice. But if that all the story was, I think it would have been a little boring. So like these nice little like sections where the main character has access to a solo story where he's just developing his powers, where he's just developing his understanding of his abilities, were nice little nuggets that kind of broke up that pacing a little bit, in addition to like the action adventure stuff that's always been there. So good, entertaining, not the best book in the series, I think. Just on the most along the lines of like, because those larger themes in the story aren't developed in this particular entry into the series. It really just focuses on Trent, which is perfectly fine. That makes it more of a slice of life entry in the series, which I personally enjoy. Gets a good review score from me with a good review score of 7.5 out of 10. That's Brambles and Thorns, an Infinite World book number 4. The score is 7.5 out of 10. Okay, last review for the week is going to be Heavenly Demon Cultivation Simulation, which is a webcomic. It is, well, there are 2 different now. I'll read the novel description first. Here's the description for the webcomic. A scout in the infamous demon cult, Sewali is on the routine patrol when his squad unexpectedly encounters a fearsome master of the Mount Way sect, the sworn enemies of the demon cult. With that morning, the Mount Way cult master slaughters the entire squad, and Sewali lies dying, lamenting years of service to the cult with nothing to show for it. He is suddenly faced with a video game prompt asking if he would like to start again. Given the opportunity to start over and make different choices, Sewali vows to survive and become stronger so he can rise to the top of the demon cult. There you go. Okay. This officially has 9 free chapters. It has an official publisher on Webtoons. Unofficially, if you go looking for it, if you look at the title, there are actually 24 chapters. So just be aware of that. This is an interesting mix of save point regression and cultivation fantasy world. So the overall world is completely cultivation. It involves very familiar themes and groups of like the demon cult versus the Mount Way sect. And if I'm saying all these things wrong, I probably am, but I don't ever hear them read out loud anywhere. And so a lot of regular cultivation things for everybody else in this universe, except for the main character. So as he's dying, there's a video game prompt, which he doesn't really understand because he's not from our world, transported anywhere. He's existed in his entire life in this fantasy cultivation world. But he can't read it. And it gives him 3 choices: resume, load, save, or restart. And each one of those options are explored throughout the series as things comes to understand and appreciates. But at the beginning, he chooses restart because he figures, why not? I would love to restart my life and not die and do better in this universe, in this world. And from there on, it really is a story where the main character is trying to figure out how to use this strange system that he has no basis for understanding necessarily. And how to survive and grow and become more powerful using this system as he does. And so he goes through several situations where he has to restart again and again, making different decisions that the system kind of forces into using notification prompts. Like he'll come to like a discussion with a character who's super powerful and the one who sent them on this mission that ultimately ends in his death. And he's given options for dialogue prompts. And so it very much feels like this turn-based system. And he's sweating because the world is frozen. He's like, if I choose this electricity, I'm gonna die because it's gonna make him mad, and he's just gonna kill me. Or and that's literally the discussion he's having with himself as he's going to be forced to make this decision, because that's the other side of the coin with this system. Yes, he's getting interesting powers. He's getting a chance to restart his life and relive things. But it's also restricting his choices to some degree. And I thought that was like a nice bit of storytelling, decision making, because otherwise he could just like flee and vanish, and it would be an entirely different story. But because these dialogue choices exist, where he's forced to make a choice, and possibly like die and redo and make a different choice, it was a nice way to kind of guide where the story was going. So I appreciated that as a storyteller, at least. And the author also, and the writers, I should say, and the graphic designers also make sure that the main character doesn't feel like a gamer. So it's very much in line with the fantasy cultivation, where he's like, I don't know what this thing is, but I understand that it's a source of power, and I'm going to try to explore it and understand it, so that I can survive and just like not get murdered in these scenarios and situations, and potentially become super powerful, which is what I think we all would do. The game mechanics in the story, I'd say they're mild RPG elements. There are no levels necessarily, but there are status pages that have characters' names, hit points, and channel energy, which is in line with the cultivation theme, and other faction details. Additionally, there are notifications. There are a lot of notifications in the story. Mandatory quests with rewards, an inventory system eventually, and these mandatory dialogue trees that the main character has to use to explore these different paths for his life, potentially. And I like the fact the main character realizes exactly how powerful the system of respawning is. And he tries to take advantage of it as much as possible. So he's not an unintelligent character, even though he starts getting really weak. It's a place that he can grow from, and he appreciates that even as somebody who is not a gamer. So it's not a gamer mentality necessarily, but it's somebody who understands how important being powerful in a mirror world is. So there we go. And the last mechanic I'll talk about is the respawn, reload, restart system. Whatever you want to call it. The main character has limited extra lives, so he has to plan out carefully how he's going to do things. And he can actually realizes eventually, what, I have 2 extra lives. I can be adventurous. I can take these risks in this life because I know that I'll die and get a chance to restart at this particular save point, or restart at the very beginning in the entire situation. And I like the fact that he uses that intelligently. In addition, he can get extra lives by killing powerful characters, which is an interesting aspect of like a risk versus reward situation, where if he can kill this person who's more powerful than him every single time, he can get an extra life. But if he dies doing it, then it's kind of a waste. Or if he dies before he can kill them, then it's definitely a waste because he's lost one of his very few extra lives. So I like that aspect as well. Overall, entertaining read. I had a good time with it. The only downside probably is that the action is a little slow sometimes, because in the middle of could be a very tense fight, the entire scene can literally come to a screeching halt because of the game mechanics and because the world freezes, and the main character might take an entire several panels to kind of think like, oh, I don't know what I'm gonna do. How am I gonna get out of this thing? And these are my choices for the action scenario. That self kind of thinking now to really kind of slow down the pacing sometimes, which is definitely just like a decision making thing in storytelling, and it could be very entertaining for some readers or for some viewers of the comic, and for other people, it really slowed it down. For me, at the beginning, when it was first introduced, it was a major drawback. Eventually, as the story progresses, the main character starts using those opportunities intelligently. So there was a nice progression there. But for me, the road I think on the story is seeing the main character use his future knowledge and the system to survive and grow in power. So it's a good combination of that regressor kind of system use. For me, the score is 7.3 out of 10. It's heavily demon cultivation system with the score 7.3 out of 10. Okay, that's it for us this week, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening, for watching. Remember, you can follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, and our website at litrpgpodcast.com. You can also download the podcast every single week on Spotify, Audible, or just from our website at litrpgpodcast.com. Plenty of options for you to listen to it and to follow it. If you want to help support the podcast this week, remember you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. Help get the podcast free and ad-free. And if it's helped you in any single way, shape, or form, just feel free to follow some of those examples of like how to help keep us going. Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging out with me today. And until we can hang out again, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.